and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
An earthquake has battered France, indecipherable on the Richter scale, but unmistakable in the real world. Like Donald Trump before her, Marine Le Pen has overturned the centrist neoliberal apple cart. What will the consequences be of the exit poll to end all exit polls? No one will have claimed to have voted for Marine Le Pen on the exit, but many will have concealed the fact that they did. She's neck and neck with President Macron. And my candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, scored a staggering 19%. You can do the maths about what's likely to happen next weekend. I'll be talking about it in just a few minutes' time. And the tectonic plates have shifted in Pakistan. Last Sunday, my goodness, a week is a long time in politics. Imran Khan was almost home free. The Speaker had ruled out a motion of no confidence and had dissolved the National Assembly. But the United States wasn't finished yet, and it has, for now, affected regime change in Islamabad, the first fruits of which came down in drones and rockets and bombs on Afghanistan through the Pakistan corridor this very evening. What could possibly go wrong? And we'll be talking about Boris Johnson's trip in civvies to the streets of Kiev. Not much sign of a war going on where Boris Johnson was, but just in case, he papped in another £150 million worth of weaponry, which will shortly all be destroyed like the Slovakian S-300s that were delivered to Ukraine last weekend and have been destroyed this weekend. There is so much to talk about, I don't know how we're going to fit it in to the next 3 hours. But fasten your seatbelts, because this truly is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, the results in France from the exit poll can scarcely be overstated in their importance for the European Union, for France, for Europe, for the world. But I'll turn to those in a minute. Some housekeeping first. First of all, if you are watching this on Facebook, where Mr. Algorithm has been unusually vigilant, unusually active, please share with every one of your contacts on Facebook. But if you are watching on screen on my YouTube channel, please subscribe. And while you're there, make a mental note to follow me on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. I'll explain why in just a few minutes' time. But the first thing I need to do, and I do it with absolute humility and gratitude, is to thank each and every one of you that donated last Sunday so generously that we managed to pay for the whole show from the donations from the general public. And I cannot stress how grateful I am to you for that. We did lose the MOATS Extra in midweek for financial reasons. Most of you believe, I think overwhelmingly, that it would be a tragedy if we were to lose the regular Sunday night mother of all talk shows. The bad news is we've got to do it all again this week. So I'm not going to beg you. I'd rather take the show off the screen than beg you. I'm just going to say to you that for just $1, if you all donate, then we'll be in clover. If each of you gives something, even a little, even $1, then the show will be secure. So please, there's the PayPal details. If you don't want to pay by PayPal, then write to us at our email address, which I'll give you and we'll put up on the screen. And we'll explain to you how you can make alternative arrangements. But PayPal is overwhelmingly the fastest and most efficient way for us to collect your donations. We're looking for a sponsor, and one or two people are nibbling at that possibility. What's not to love? You get an audience this week, again, of more than 1 million. I'll give you the exact number shortly when it comes up on the screen. More than 1 million people in a 3-hour show. Your logo can be behind me. Your company name can be on the ticker below me. I can be shouting out the fact that you are the sponsor of the show. It's a no-brainer. There's no television in the world that would deliver an audience of that size over that length of time for the amount of money we need from a sponsor. So it's very important that you don't forget that whilst you can watch free, there are no tuition fees. I'll keep speaking whether you give or not, but I won't be able to keep speaking indefinitely unless you make a donation. So please, don't make me ask again in the course of the show. Get your donations in now. Now, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen are facing each other off in the final round of the French presidential race. That much was predictable, but several things about today's first round of voting were not predicted, at least not by some of the people closest to me. It was imagined that Macron would be several clear points ahead of Le Pen, and it was predicted that my candidate, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, would be trailing very badly behind. In fact, Mélenchon got 19% of the vote, Macron got 24% of the vote, and Le Pen also got 24% of the vote, although I predict that actually she will have finished the first round of voting ahead of Macron because of the shy Le Pen voter syndrome. Many people would have balked at telling the pollster at the gate of the polling station that they had voted for Le Pen, but they will in fact have done so. A phenomenon well known in the United States, over Trump in Britain, over Thatcher. The shy Tory syndrome is a thing. Now, this result is of enormous moment. Why? First of all, there are two candidates to the right of Marine Le Pen who each polled 8%. That's 16% vote to the right of Le Pen that must be assumed overwhelmingly to go to Le Pen in the second ballot next Sunday. But here's the important and perhaps clinching argument. Polling throughout this campaign has shown that whilst Mélenchon is the candidate of the left, a significant part of his voting bloc will next week either not vote at all or, in quite startling numbers, will vote for Le Pen. She recognized the potential of this phenomenon and pushed her economic policy further and further to the left. And because a lot of Mélenchon's voters are the former partisans of the PCF, the French Communist Party, once mighty, once led by the great Georges Marcello, who was a communist Gaullist, who didn't like the United States domination of Europe, who preferred Russia to the United States. His vote hasn't gone away, you know. And those who voted for Mélenchon in the first ballot, who lean in that direction, have also been catered for by Marine Le Pen's tilt towards hostility to the West's policy against Russia in the form of sanctions against Russia, in the form of military assistance in the proxy war between NATO and Russia being fought over the dead bodies and destroyed cities of the Ukraine. So Le Pen is running against Macron next Sunday to his left on economic policy, and I would call it to his left on international policy. She's running to his right on social policy, particularly towards Muslims, and you'll hear a lot this week. You'll hear much wailing and gnashing of teeth and rending of garments from liberals everywhere. That Le Pen will be beastly to the Muslims and to the immigrants, even though they themselves have spent decades murdering Muslims and supporting the murder of Muslims, like that old lady, a mother of 7 children, shot dead in cold blood on camera in Bethlehem, of all places, this very day. So killing Muslims is okay in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, and in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank. That's all fine. But having a negative attitude towards Muslim women's headgear in France will shortly become the big issue in international politics, because this is a potential death blow to the liberals, to the centrists, to the people who have been in power, to the Clintons, to the Bidens, to the US Democrats, to the Starmerites, to the PASOKs everywhere. Incidentally, the French Socialist Party, which once held the presidency regularly, has disappeared to the point of negligibility in the first round of the French presidential voting. People everywhere are going to start turning on their governments. Instead of blaming Russia and blaming Putin, they're going to start blaming their own leaders for the state that we are in. Even if they believe all the propaganda, about which more later, even if they believe it, they can't do anything about Putin. They can't do anything about Russia, but they can do something about the Macrons, about the Boris Johnsons, about the von der Leyens, about all these European leaders, and in particular, they can do something about the shrunken Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Schulz. Soldier Schulz is going to destroy his government on the rocks of his capitulation to Joe Biden on issues of trade, particularly in energy, but also in wheat, also in raw materials vital for the great manufacturing sector of the German economy. Even if the voters believe that this is all Putin's fault, they know they can do nothing about Putin, but they can do plenty about soldier Schulz. So him and his Green Party, grotesque Green Party in Germany, will, I predict, be swept away, maybe by the end of this 12-month, because the German people are not going to shiver and are not going to go hungry, are not going to see their industry slow down and stop, because Joe Biden wants to have a proxy war with Russia on the body of Ukraine. These are big predictions I'm making. But I'm the one that predicted Le Pen's result today, just as I earlier predicted Donald Trump's victory. This is a victory by the same kind of forces against the same kind of forces. Macron is Clinton. Clinton is Macron. Both are either defeated or are now facing defeat. And the only way the Democrats could have clung on to power in the United States of America was by foul means not fair, as is increasingly clear in the Biden crime family affair. I hope to get an opportunity to ask some of our guests about it today, but a quick recap is necessary. The entire United States, deep state, all of its organs, and all of its media suppressed a story and branded it as Russian disinformation that would have cost Joe Biden the presidential election. Undoubtedly, the polls are clear. If they'd known then what they know now, more than 10% of them would have voted differently. The suppression of that story by big tech, by the US media, and with the active collusion, maybe organization, of the deep state security services of the United States, successfully interfered in the democracy of the American people. And they clung on by their fingernails, but the cost of it was they've got to have Joe Biden in power for the next couple of years. But in November, at the midterm elections, I predict that the Democrats will suffer a crushing landslide defeat, will thus lose control of the Congress, and will then be put on trial. Impeachment will be back on the agenda. Prosecution and imprisonment of members of the first family, not just the son, Hunter Biden, but others in the Biden crime family, will be on the table, on the television, in the courtroom, in the dock. So if Le Pen succeeds next Sunday, the implications are enormous. The implications for a Europe with a weak German leadership and a new Eurosceptic to say the least, leadership in France, the unwillingness to follow US diktat right over the cliff to be dashed on the rocks below will suddenly hit a brick wall. And I hope that that happens. Not because I support Marine Le Pen, I support Mélenchon. But I entirely understand why many of Mélenchon's voting base will do anything to destroy the bogus Blairite centrism of Emmanuel Macron, a pumped-up little emperor on Cuban heels. He is undeserving of the leadership of the great people of France. And I hope that Mélenchon now will rebuild a powerful left in France that can be a beacon, a revolutionary beacon, as France has been so often historically, to left-thinking people, socialists all over the world. We'll talk later in the show about these things. Imran Khan is out. His life is in danger. It's reported that he is on the no-fly list. He's unable to leave the country. It may be that he faces arrest. It may be that he faces much worse than arrest. Everything I said last Sunday, I stand by. I'm not one of Imran Khan's party men. I don't know, and it's not my business, how good he is or not as a prime minister. I'm only interested in this simple basic fact. Imran Khan has been overthrown in a coup organized by the United States of America, who wished to retain Pakistan at a distance of thousands of miles and absolute contempt and neglect to keep Pakistan as their plaything. Against Russia, yes, but mainly against China. This coup is so that the United States can install military bases in Pakistan, the better with which to threaten China, to complete the encirclement of China with US military bases. And as I said, the first bitter fruits of this coup d'etat which has been mounted in Islamabad with the collusion of stooges, American stooges, has been tasted in blood by people in Afghanistan this evening. American cruise missile attacks, which would not have been permitted by Imran Khan, have been launched against the people of Afghanistan. For what purpose? We don't know. What the alleged or avowed targets were, we don't know. But war has returned to Pakistan. Not just American war by proxy, but the potential, depending on what happens next, because there will be no general election now. It's all been overturned. Khan was going to take his case to the people. I thought that if he did, he would sweep the country in a landslide victory. But none of that will now be possible. So what happens to the half of the country that supported Imran Khan and reject Pakistan as a plaything, as a proxy of the United States of America, as it was at great cost throughout the 1980s in the long war in Afghanistan? And I wonder if you remember how all that turned out. Only time for a couple of minutes on the British political scene. Britain has a finance minister called the Chancellor of the Exchequer. His name is Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is a man worth hundreds of millions of pounds. And he answers to the name of Lucky, because he married a woman who is the heiress not to hundreds of millions of pounds, but to billions of pounds. It now turns out that the British finance minister for 18 months secretly held a green card allowing him to do business and to work in the United States of America while his billionaire wife was registered offshore, not paying a penny in tax, while her husband was the Minister of Finance. I'm not making any of this up. This has actually just happened. Now, in the annals of political corruption, especially Tory corruption, but not only Tory corruption, this is on the front page. This is on the cover. The man whose duty it is to pursue individuals, small businesses, even to break individuals and small businesses, to collect their taxes, his wife has got her billions offshore deliberately to avoid paying any tax on them at all, whilst he has a green card in his pocket ready to make a quick getaway to the United States of America. Should he resign? Is the Pope a Catholic? How can you possibly have a finance minister whose wife is a tax dodger? Do you know what he's done? He's demanded an immediate inquiry. Not into his wife, not into himself, but into who leaked the facts that I have just imparted to you. Shoot the messenger, find them, strap them to a stake and burn them, but don't dare raise the obvious point. I'm still listening and waiting for the so-called opposition in Britain to say anything about any of this, anything meaningful. Why haven't they tabled a motion of no confidence in the Chancellor of the Exchequer? Why haven't they brought him to the bar of the House and prosecuted him for what is quite evidently, if not an illegal act, then an act so immoral that no political figure would be able to survive it? I'm still waiting for Keir Starmer. Boris Johnson thinks he won the next British general election by strolling around downtown Kiev in his civvies just this week. There was no sign of war, no sign of bombardment. In fact, this is a war that has been largely characterized by a lack of war footage. Certainly there was none visible when Boris Johnson visited President Zelensky in Kiev to hand over still more of our country's money to him in the form of weapons supplies to keep the war going. Now, here's another prediction for you. The day will come, and it will come soon, when many, many people will realize that they've been lied to, that they've been had. The advantage was taken of them because they did not understand what lies behind and what lies beneath this situation in the Ukraine. We'll talk more about it later. I've already outstayed my welcome. Can I throw to the poll? Will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? Will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. And on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. By the way, the figure from last week was 1,104,075. That was the audience last week. Let's see if we can beat it this week. I'll be right back after this. Big thanks, obviously, to all our subscribers and listeners to the MOATS podcast. For the older amongst you, a podcast is the distilled version, about half as long as the 3-hour mother of all talk shows, which has become a phenomenon on the internet. And also my new Wednesday show, The Galloway Show, which I hope you'll tune into on my YouTube channel, exclusively on YouTube on Wednesday at 7 o'clock. That's also got a podcast, which has also gone off like a rocket. Now, you get them on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But in recent weeks, the podcast has been the #1 political podcast in Algeria, Ghana, Oman, Namibia, Ecuador, Slovenia, Zimbabwe, Malaysia, Bulgaria, Iceland, Kuwait, Costa Rica, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Tanzania, and now in Singapore, #1 in those countries. The podcast's also a regular in the top 50 of China, please note, Russia, France, Spain, India, Israel, Brazil, Pakistan, Canada, Hong Kong, and Japan, as well as being active in 79 other top 100s around the world. So it's a media phenomenon, and it's tearing up the mainstream media monopoly. Please download it on Apple or Spotify and leave us a 5-star review, like Sanam in London, who said, George, I've been watching your show for a long time, and I must admit that you are a true leader and very courageous man to carry on your work of exposing the truth and showing us the other side of the picture, which always gets blocked by the US and the West through their media. God bless you always. Sanam in London. Very touching, Sanam. Thank you very much for that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, let's start with Imran Khan and the situation in Pakistan. Munib Hamid is a broadcast journalist from Pakistan covering international relations, and he's a commentator and political analyst, very well respected. Munib, welcome to the show. I'm grateful to you for joining me, especially as it's not early. It's late at night where you are. Am I right in saying that the first round has gone to the United States and its allies in the Pakistan opposition, that Imran Khan is no more, and that his life is potentially now at risk?
Thank you, George, for having me here. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. And I guess, keeping in view, looking at the situation, how it developed last night, it was one hell of a night last night, and we couldn't sleep all night because of what was happening in Pakistan. And of course, we saw a lot of surprises coming up The Supreme Court opened at midnight. The Islamabad High Court opened at 10 p.m. Then the Election Commission of Pakistan was opened, although it was a holiday. We were seeing a lot of things happening, so it does seem, it doesn't seem actually, it is confirmation that the US had won the first round. Yes, that is true.
Now, what happens next? What will happen, first of all, to Imran Khan personally?
We are expecting, as the former Minister for Information had stated today, that the PTI government, the former PTI government, and now the PTI chairman Imran Khan, it's quite hard to digest this so far, but they have decided that they are maybe going for the resignations, but that is not confirmation. But this thing is certain that Imran Khan is going to come on the roads and he is going to gather the public support. And as today, as we're speaking, nationwide protests are happening, and thousands of people have rallied in Islamabad to show support for Imran Khan. And this is what he had in his mind, and this is what he had stated earlier in his addresses to the nation, in his speeches, that I am going to the public, and the public is going to help me, and the public is not slave, unlike the ministers, unlike the MNAs, unlike the other political parties. They are not slave. They are people who believe in independence, in sovereignty, and this is what Imran Khan is going to do. He is going to gather the public support and come out against the government.
But he can't get a general election, can he, unless a given number of MNAs resign? I'm presuming that number is larger than the number he has still loyal to him.
So he needs 172 resignations if they are to dissolve the National Assembly. And if the National Assembly dissolves, that is the only way they can move to the elections. Now, Imran Khan doesn't have 172 members with him, because if he had 172 members, he would have won the no confidence motion against him. So it is a very tricky situation now, and we have to see as how it develops. But the point is that Imran Khan is not going to give up. This is very clear. And even if he doesn't have those numbers, this is very much possible that he might not decide to resign from the National Assembly. He might stay there. He might appoint an opposition leader. He might force and he might push the sitting government into opening an investigation into that letter which the National Security Committee of Pakistan, which was in the meeting, all the army chiefs were present and the DGISI was present, and they all endorsed that threat letter. They called the U.S. ambassador to the foreign minister, to the foreign minister's office. They protested. They sent a démarche. So they have endorsed the letter. So now the point is, and the number one thing that Imran Khan is going to push is to open an independent investigation to find out whether the letter he says is a threat letter received from the United States is truth or not, whether it's real or whether it's fake, because there is a debate happening in Pakistan. There is a certain amount of society which claims that the threat letter received and endorsed by the National Security Committee is fake. If the letter was fake, how come the National Security Committee endorsed the letter? They called the U.S. ambassador. They sent a démarche. So this is something which is happening in Pakistan. It is a mess here. But let's see. Imran Khan is not going to give up. That's for certain. That's for sure. And he is going to push for an investigative committee so that they can find the truth to the investigation, into the investigation of the letter. And of course, since Imran Khan could not release the letter and show to the mass public because of the Security Act. But this is certain that after the National Security Committee's endorsement, with all the forces chiefs present, this does make a very, very big difference.
Now, who will be the new government? One presumes it will be the Sharif brothers, Nawaz and Shahbaz Sharif have been in double harness in the Punjab and in the national government of Pakistan for so many years, decades in fact. But Nawaz Sharif is terribly, terribly ill. That's why he was released to come to England. Presumably he's not in a state to return and become Prime Minister again. Does that mean that his brother Shahbaz, whom I know quite well, I may say, last time I spoke to him was in Edgware Road, I think he owns some fine properties there. Will he be the Prime Minister?
Right, George. So now Shahbaz Sharif is the selected, the terminology goes to Shahbaz Sharif now, which they have been claiming about Imran Khan. So yeah, Shahbaz Sharif is eyeing the position of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and expectedly, this isn't confirmed, but Maulana Fazlur Rahman is eyeing for the position of the President of Pakistan. And Nawaz Sharif, interestingly, he had a confirmed flight from London to Islamabad on the 3rd of April, the date on which the counting, on which the motion was to be moved in the National Assembly and the voting was to be done. But the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, ruled out the voting, and then we saw a cancellation of Nawaz Sharif's seat from London to Islamabad. So it seems that he was really, really ill. He was really, really sick. His platelets, they're just up and down. And before 3rd April, he was really sick. On 3rd April, he became perfect. And then on the evening of 3rd April, when the Speaker ruled out the motion, so he became sick again. And obviously, he has been running away from the courts. He is in London, and you have seen his properties worth millions of pounds, embezzled, money laundered. He is a runaway from the Pakistani courts. He's been convicted. He's been sentenced. He cannot run for elections. So Shahbaz Sharif is the man who is going to come into power, and we are expecting a lot of changes from the new government. For example, they are going to offer NROs to all of these corrupt politicians, to all of these members who have helped the Sharifs or the Pakistan Democratic Movement in ousting Imran Khan. We are also possibly seeing that now Nawaz Sharif has turned all perfect, and he's the fittest he's ever been in his life now. After the ouster of Imran Khan. So we also are expecting a return of Nawaz Sharif to the country. And once he comes back to the country, so the sitting Prime Minister, his younger brother, might give him NRO, National Reconciliation Order, and all is forgiven. And he might again become the chairman of the political party. It's a mess. But the thing is that the new government to come is going to make a lot of changes, and amounting to the complete cleansing of the cases, corruption cases, murder cases against them, against their loyal members who were bought by millions of rupees, and of which there is video proof, interestingly. But very interestingly, the Supreme Court in Pakistan was listening to Shahbaz Sharif review petition when the Deputy Speaker, cancelled the voting motion. So Shahbaz Sharif was a runaway. He was a convicted money launderer, and he was not appearing in local courts because whenever the courts asked him to make an appearance so that they can indict him, so Shahbaz Sharif always used to make the excuse of health issues, but miraculously, he somehow, maybe he took some injections or whatever, some powerful medicines, that he was able to go to the Supreme Court of Pakistan and stand in front of the Chief Justice of Pakistan. And the Chief Justice of Pakistan was listening to a convict, a money launderer, a person who has not been answering the courts of Pakistan. So this was also a very big surprise. And I mean, last night, George, we saw Imran Khan under really hot waters. And we saw how the entire country's institutions united against this one man. And he's not being ousted. He's not being thrown out of power because of corruption. He's not being thrown out of power because he's embezzled money or money laundering or any other corruption charges. His only charge was that he said absolutely not to the United States. He went to Russia when the US were forcing him to not visit Russia. And he said that I am going to make a sovereign state with an independent foreign policy, and my people, 220 million people, are not slave to any man or country. This is the reason why they all want him out. And of course, his fight against the corruption inside Pakistan, because if he stays in power, they know he is going to get them all behind the bars.
Well, he's used to standing alone at the crease, and he may well have lost the first round, but nobody should bet against him coming back. Thanks very much indeed, Munib, for joining us at this late hour from Pakistan. I'm hoping very much that Imran will make an appearance too. Thank you very much indeed. The poll: will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? Yes, 67, no 31 on Twitter. Yes, 69, no 31 on YouTube. And on Telegram, yes, 71, no 29. You can vote for the next hour and 15 minutes. But let me go to the first question of the evening. This is the week in 1961 that the Soviet Union won the space race, when cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. What was the name of his spaceship? Was it A, Vostok 1, B, Soyuz, C, Proton? Answer right after this break.
Hi, George. The deep state, we mentioned it before. So rather than fear-mongering that everything that's going on at the moment with the COVID, the wars, blah, 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 why aren't we all addressing the deep state rather than this fear-mongering that's going over and over again?
How do you address it?
What I'm trying to get across, and hopefully your listeners will understand this, there is a deep state at work, and you know that.
Everybody knows that. That's a statement of the bleeding obvious.
So what? Oh, so let's do something about that, rather than rushing and rolling about the.
Give us a lead. Be our leader. Be our leader, Del.
Who are the deep states?
Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant question. Those that are all over us. What should we do about them? We should make them accountable.
I'm just trying to work out whether you're in the territory of shape-shifting lizards, or you're talking about MI5 and MI6.
Please don't turn it into a circus, George. You know full well what's going on, and please don't.
I do. I'm just struggling to get from you what it is we should be doing about them. What should I do about MI5 and MI6, and how should I do it?
Just stand up and go, there's something inherently wrong here. And
there's something really wrong here. There you are. I've sorted it, Del. Thanks for the call.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube, and on my Telegram. And do subscribe, please, to my YouTube channel if you are watching on it. Now, the war drags on, of course. Bloody, unnecessary war in Ukraine. It's dragged on now for 8 long years. A war of attrition, and then a new kind of war with the Russian invasion of the country in the last week of February. It is, of course, a melancholy disaster for the people of the Ukraine, but it is not going to come to an end anytime soon. The Eurocrats were quite clear in their statement yesterday that this war must be won on the battlefield, thus ruling out any negotiated solution to the killing. The United States is willing to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, and now so is the European Union, and so is the right sector and the Azov and all the other ultra-nationalist Banderites that infest the political life of Western Ukraine. We will increasingly have to start seeing Ukraine as 2 places. Eastern Ukraine, where 40% of the population lived, and which is overwhelmingly Russian in character, and 60% in the west of the country, which looks towards Europe, looks towards the United States, but evinces some of the most horrific ethos and actions that one will ever see on social media, of course. They will not see it on the Western television. They didn't show on the Western television the Russian soldier strapped to an anti-tank tramp, tortured and then set on fire. But many people have seen it because they, perhaps helpfully, filmed themselves doing it. Many people are aware of the war crimes that are being committed in this conflict. Some of them obvious in their origin, others less obvious. All of them urgently requiring independent investigation by the United Nations, which appears to have gone completely dumb. The Western governments are piling in weapons, even though those weapons are then very quickly being destroyed and lost. I gave you the example. Last Sunday, Slovakia delivered a whole battery of S-300 anti-aircraft weapons, which by this Sunday have all been completely destroyed. If one were to calculate the value of Western military equipment which has been given to Western Ukraine and which has now been either captured by the Russian forces or destroyed by Russian missile and air attack, it would undoubtedly run into billions. And those are your billions. They are billions that you needed here at home. Billions that you needed for your crumbling infrastructure. Billions that you needed to pay down your spiraling debt. Billions that you needed to keep your people warm in the winter time and keep your wheels of industry turning. I'm very clear as to how this is going to end. I'm clear that it's going to go on for a long, long time. Perhaps as long as I have remaining on this earth. But the possibility of World War III erupting on the territory of Ukraine has inched closer. The European declaration yesterday or the day before that the war must go on until it is won is a recipe for endless war. Whether the European public and the North American public are prepared to pay for that in every way, in a long cold summer and a bitter winter at the end of this year, remains to be seen. But the political class and the military-industrial complex have not lost their hunger for war against Russia. Now let's talk to someone who's there. George Eliason is an American investigative journalist in Donbas covering the war, and I'm very, very glad to meet him. George, thanks for coming on the mother of all talk shows. Give us some background first. Where are you from and why are you there?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts originally, and I was here a long time before the war started. I moved to Ukraine in 2010. I lived a few years in West Ukraine, and I moved to Donbas in 2012. So I predate the war here, and I didn't come here for it. It came for us.
Well, it was ill-fated in many respects, although it has allowed you to emerge as one of the star reporters of the conflict, because only 2 years after you went there, the coup in Kiev took place and the war began.
Mm-hmm.
How has it been?
Yeah, early on, I broke a lot of the first stories about everything coming, Maidan, everything coming out of Maidan in the West. Back then, Ukraine was just kind of unorganized in its media operation. And it was actually leaders of the diaspora that were doing the commenting, trying to deplatform people. And you'd have Radio Svoboda trying to tear apart articles that you wrote. That's what it was like then. Right now, they have, in 2022, Ukraine has a 300,000 person IT army. And they're doing DDoS hacks across the world. They're attacking companies, people, deplatforming people, demonetizing people. Getting news out of Donbas, out of the republics, is very difficult. And because of all the deplatforming and demonetizing from 2015, 2016 and onward, a lot of the news and opinion platforms are afraid to carry news from here. That allowed them to, when they started the info war, to literally leave everybody else voiceless. And it's the same people that were doing it in 2014. Once in a while, I talk to the manager of the media operation. He contacts me to gloat.
Yeah, now their media operation is of course lavishly funded from the West. The Kiev Independent newspaper, for example, is revealed to have been kick-started basically by, I think, Canadian funding. There's millions of pounds being spent, dollars being spent on the media operation, and President Zelensky has had a good war on a personal level. I mean, he's on the front page of the magazines, he's posing in photo shoots. I saw one today with sacks behind him that were supposed to look like defensive ramparts, but were on closer inspection found to be sacks of sugar. The whole operation to glamorize the president of Ukraine has been an enormous success, hasn't it?
Well, it should. The companies that actually put this together are out of the UK. They came out of Saatchi and Saatchi. You're familiar with their work, yes? Yeah. For Margaret Thatcher and such. Then you're familiar with Nigel Oakes, SCL. Are you familiar with IOTA Global, Colonel Steve Tatum?
Go on.
They started, pardon?
Yes, go on.
IOTA Global was the only information operation company in the world that had to get military licensing. These people could literally drop boots on the ground next to you. That's what their licensing is. And they were out of the UK. They started their contract in around 2011, 2012 in Ukraine, doing all the prep work for Maidan, getting it set up as a media operation. Now, a lot of it's funded by the various diasporas, Ukrainian diasporas and other friendly diasporas. They work together. If you look at the MH17 investigation, now everything that actually went to the Netherlands came out of Ukraine's Information Operations Group. It was Inform Napalm, Bellingcat, etc., that was set up by SCL. And they were on a Canadian government contract for that. And that's actually public information. You just need to know where to look for it. Now, as it turned into the 2016 elections, you'll notice if you think back, everything kind of went quiet in Ukraine. It's because the same people were focusing on Hillary Clinton's election. So when you look at the Steele dossier, it was groups associated with the information operations in Ukraine itself. You had their anti-censor group that found we'll say the Manafort Black Book, start with that. Well, they were with Pravi Sector and the actual guy on social media that got Maidan rolling were all together, and they found something that was impossible to find because it didn't exist. It was Ukraine's hacking groups that actually put it together. And I've documented all the people involved with that. The Steele dossier...
Listen, now we're running out of time, George, so tell people how they can read your stuff.
Oh, God, a lot of the platforms were taken down. I'm starting to put it up at Substack right now. You can find me on Muckrack if you're looking for it. I've documented the entire info op. Now, the way it runs into now, did you know that Ukraine destroyed a Russian ship in the Black Sea? Are you aware of that?
No, but we don't have time to develop it, unfortunately, because I've got to go to the news.
Oh, well,
I'll certainly be reading anything that you have written, George. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? Overwhelmingly, people think that she will. Now, coming up in the next hour, we've got Marcello Ferradade, a Swedish professor of epidemiology and chief editor of the Indicter, on the backfiring of US sanctions. Of course, we'll be talking more about the poll and about the French election. If you're calling from the United Kingdom, 08081 965522. It's entirely free of charge. If you're in the United States or Canada, +1 844 944 3344. Or you can email us anytime at onair@moats.tv. But first, it's the news with the redoubtable Elliot King.
Voting in the first round of the French presidential election has now closed, with the incumbent Emmanuel Macron facing a far-right challenger in Marine Le Pen. 49 million people are eligible to decide which 2 of 12 candidates should take part in the runoff vote. But the indications are that less than half of voters have turned out the lowest for 20 years. The campaign has been overshadowed first by the COVID-19 pandemic and then Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Macron has spent little time on the race, focusing instead on Europe's reaction to the war. One issue more than any other has predominated the election: the spiralling costs of living in energy bills and shopping baskets. When he came to power with a new party in 2017, Emmanuel Macron swept away the old allegiances, and the two big parties are still nursing their wounds. Socialist candidate Anne Hidalgo has struggled to be heard, while on the right Valérie Pécresse has failed to excite the Republicans. Now the main challenger to Macron is coming from Le Pen on the far right and Jean-Luc Mélenchon on the left. A Whitehall inquiry is underway into how the tax affairs of UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak's wife were leaked to the media. Akshata Murthy has said that she will now pay UK tax on her overseas earnings following a row over her non-domiciled status. She owns 700 million in shares of the Indian IT giant Infosys, founded by her father, from which she received 11.6 million in dividend income last year. Labour has said the rows raise questions about Sunak's judgment. As a non-domiciled or non-dom UK resident, Murthy is not required by law to pay UK taxes on her overseas income. This would have saved her 2.1 million a year in UK tax. After details of her non-dom status appeared in the press on Wednesday evening, Sunak said his wife had not done anything wrong and it was unfair to attack her as a private citizen. But on Friday, his wife announced she would change her tax arrangements. Health Secretary Sajid Javid has now become the latest cabinet minister to find his private financial arrangements under scrutiny, as he admitted to being a non-dom in the past. Javid, who lived and worked in New York and Singapore during his career as a banker at Chase Manhattan and Deutsche Bank, also disclosed that becoming a minister, he had held some financial investments in an offshore trust. Labour accused the Health Secretary of hypocrisy after he and other ministers spent much of last week defending a rise in national insurance that is aimed at putting more money into the NHS. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has been ousted from power after losing a no-confidence vote in his leadership. The vote was held past midnight after opposition parties brought a motion against him following days of drama. The motion was first brought last week, but the former cricket star blocked it by dissolving Parliament. Sunday's vote took place after the country's Supreme Court ruled in favour of opposition parties and said that Khan had acted unconstitutionally. Opposition leader Shehbaz Sharif, who is expected to be chosen as the next Prime Minister tomorrow, said Pakistan and its parliament were finally freed from a serious crisis, adding in a tweet, "Congratulations to the Pakistan nation on a new dawn." If voted in by Parliament, Sharif, a long-time rival of Khan and brother of former three-time Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, would be able to hold power until October 2023, when the next election is due to be held. Khan has accused the United States of being behind his ousting. Congestion chaos at the British port of Dover is reportedly costing transport companies £800 per lorry, as British haulers of perishable goods complain the long waiting times are causing products to go bad. The suspension of P&O ferry services at the terminals, as well as Easter traffic, IT issues and bad weather, have led to lengthy queues for transporters. Haulers of perishable goods now want to be given priority at the busy port in Kent. One meat hauler, Eardley International, said lorries were experiencing delays of 20 to 25 hours to cross the channel. Company director Graham Eardley explained that the company, which is based in Lockerbie in Scotland, takes fresh meat from the UK into Europe. Police have begun an investigation after Manchester United star Cristiano Ronaldo appeared to slap a young fan's phone to the ground after his side's defeat to Everton yesterday. Footage shared on Twitter shows Cristiano Ronaldo throwing his right hand towards the ground as he left the Goodison Park pitch yesterday, after what appears to be a phone bouncing out of a spectator's hand and onto the ground. The fan's mother has claimed her 14-year-old son, Jake Harding, was left bruised by the incident, which left the youngster in complete shock. Cristiano Ronaldo apologised for the incident on Instagram and has invited the fan to a match at Old Trafford. 2 airline passengers accused of unruly behaviour have been hit with the largest fines ever proposed by the US Federal Aviation Administration. The 5-figure penalties on the 2 flyers accused of violence are part of a $2 million or £1.5 million in fines levied this year. US airlines have seen record numbers of disruptive passengers since early 2021, with many incidents involving the refusal to wear any antiviral face masks. And finally, a set of rare notebooks filled with notes by Charles Darwin have been anonymously returned to the University of Cambridge over 20 years after they were initially reported missing. The 2 notebooks, one of which includes Darwin's famous 1837 Tree of Life sketch, were returned to Cambridge University's library last month. The university said in a statement, "They were left outside the librarian's office and wrapped in plastic inside a pink gift bag with a brown envelope containing the notebook's archive box and an unsigned printed note which simply read, 'Librarian, Happy Easter.' The precious items, which the university believes are worth millions, were discovered missing during a routine check in January 2001. When it was revealed that the small box contained the notebooks, it had not been returned to its correct place. Following an exhaustive search spanning almost 2 decades, the university officially declared the notebooks missing and likely stolen in November 2021. A happy return indeed. That's all your news on MOATS. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
The reverberations of the exit poll and the counting which is ongoing of the French presidential elections first round are truly extraordinary. Get voting now on my question, which is, will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? Now, the European governments, hook, line and sinker, with some exceptions, the Austrian Chancellor is flying to Moscow tomorrow to meet with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. That may or may not be of some significance. It's certainly unexpected, and it's unclear as to who he's talking for, if anyone else at all, other than the Austrian government. But the Austrian government has been clear that it cannot survive cutting off Russian oil and gas and wheat and other manufacturing imports of basic commodities and raw materials, without which the Austrian government cannot function. Ditto the government of Hungary. And ditto other European governments, though with varying degrees of sotto voce. But the time will come when all of them will have to speak out in one voice that they're not prepared to sacrifice their economies on the altar of Joe Biden's desperate attempt to maintain the United States empire's hegemony in the world, that they can't afford to fight Russia, let alone fight Russia and China at the same time. So we thought we'd talk to a man who has studied the impact of sanctions, the impact on the receiving country and the impact on the imposing country. And he is Professor Marcello Ferradade de Noli. He's a Swedish professor of epidemiology and chief editor of the Inditer, founder of Swedish Doctors for Human Rights. The Inditer sounds like a formidable publication. Professor, thank you for joining us. Who should we indict first? Would be many people's question. But how do you evaluate the impact of these truly extraordinary sanctions that have been imposed on Russia? 6,000 sanctions are now in place on the Russian economy. If you want a yardstick for that, there are 600 sanctions currently imposed on the government of Venezuela. Tell us, Professor, how do you evaluate these?
Well, George, we are living times of war, and all main news and our everyday imagery is invaded of episodes happening on the war fronts. So one first association, let me tell you this, that I got when I received the invitation to this show, the mother of all talks shows, inevitably, the association arising my recall was the mother of all bombs. There was a powerful artifact that the United States thrown in Afghanistan, as you remember. Yes. It was so powerful that according to the reports at the time, I heard that on American TV, the earth-shaking waves were felt intensely in the perimeter of miles away, the epicenter of the explosion. Now, answering to your question, yes, the impact of the bombastic economic sanctions that the United States and its clients in the European Union thrown against Russia is now reaching intensely and increasingly the economies in the vicinity of the intentional target, meaning the economy of the Russian Federation. So that has had an impact felt and increasingly seriously in the European countries. So another automatic association I got with this item was for me to recall that even if the United States and NATO has at disposal that, what I name it, the mother of all bombs, the Russians, for their part, developed one of its own. That is a bomb reputed to actually being 4 times more powerful than the Americans. They have a blast of impact of 44 tons or whatever, TNT. And that is known as the father of all bombs. So there is a dynamic here too, using this allegory. Sanctions are intended to decimate the economy of the Russian Federation, but the things are actually acting as a boomerang. There is a response that we might be expected from the Russia, but the sanction itself, they are hurting and very badly the European economies. We have this in terms of inflation, we have in terms of touch of gas, coal, and oil, and benzene prices. They are rocking up, etc., etc. Well, what I mean
so
it's
the mother. It's the mother of all boomerangs, Professor. Let's look at the epicenter of that backfire, which has to be Germany. I mean, Britain, which depends less on Russian oil and gas, has petrol at almost £2 per litre. I've just bought some. Almost £2 per litre, 1.92 per litre, which for the old-fashioned among us is a price of £8.5 per gallon. This is in Britain, where our dependence is less. But Germany is where the dependence is greatest. And they have a coalition government with no great stability about it. How do you think it will impact on Germany?
Well, it would impact very much in Germany, not only Germany, in Italy too, and all those countries that they have a high dependency of the Russian oil. In general terms, is 40% of their the natural gas is coming from Russia. Now you mentioned this in Germany. There's a coalition government. They have the Greens, part of that government. They are being high in their agenda of the environmental agenda, and now with this crisis, they are thinking to resort to the old nuclear based energy providers, and that will
and coal
and coal, yes, exactly. And now. Well, about the coal, we have these sanctions, the new sanctions from the European Union. They would also cut the imports of coal from Russia. But the question is, where are they going to get, the alternative coal and the natural gas, etc. They are not prepared for that. And what they were prepared was to implement the Nord Stream 2. But that after the pressure of the United States, they got the possibility too. So So they are just starting, the fall, the economic fall, the crisis just starting in Europe, and not only Germany, I insist. Then
yes,
we have
a very good point. There are many European countries vulnerable. And as I said earlier in the introduction, the Austrian Chancellor is flying to Moscow tomorrow to meet with Putin. Have you any idea what that's about?
No, actually, but the thing is that those talks can be converted in that Austria could be a new factor in trying to bring about talks and understanding between the conflicted parties. That is one derivate that I believe that it could result of this visit. We know that Austria has been very reluctant to or even opposing the mainstream agenda of the European Union, which is actually the United States agenda. Without these people fully understand what is going on, you see, this is about Germany, for instance. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the war was started by Ukraine, or those who were inciting the war for 8 years ago, and then they were sure or pretty sure what was going to happen if they were going to conceal to Russia that actually they were not. They did not have intentions to admit Ukraine in NATO. They said to Ukraine in secrecy, "We are not going to get you inside NATO," but they kept repeating the opposite to Russia. So they were provoking this war. So the plan of the United States was so clear from the beginning. And in this plan is what I mean. In this plan, I think that it was also the weakening of the German economy, because the German economy is the strongest in Europe, and with all those situations, it's going to suffer. Not only the economy is going to suffer, their political standard, and on top of that, now they are increasing their military budget, and all that is going to have a very severe impact in their economy and in their lives at all, and that. Who's going to be the winner of that situation? Of course, the United States. So there's a lot of measures that the European Union is promoting without really thinking what would be the consequences for their own peoples. And sanctions, sanctions, they are not. There is not an equation. Sanctions and results, and they're going to destroy this government. Well, that is not so. We have examples in history. We have no in history. We have Cuba. During 54 years, the United States have been imposing economic sanctions against Cuba, and there you have Cuba still standing. You have 56 years of sanctions against the North Korea government, and there you have the North Korea government, sending, propelling rockets of intercontinental dimension. So sanctions per se might very well, as you mentioned yourself, converted in a boomerang for those who were throwing them. They have consequences, and those consequences are unpredictable in many cases. We know that by history.
Professor Noli, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Much obliged to you. Now, the mother of all talk shows is expanding again. You can now watch us on Rumble. Let's get ready to rumble. Go to rumble.com and search George Galloway. You'll find the live stream of this show. So if for whatever reason you can't find us on the usual channels, that's where we will be. You can also search getter.com. Again, you'll find me there live streaming. I'm going to be putting much more time into Getter. It's a new platform for me, but I'm encouraged by the early reaction to my interventions there. So if you were used to finding me elsewhere, that's probably where I'll be hanging out now. Now, I forgot to give you the answer to the first question, which was, this is the week in 1961 that the Soviet Union won the space race when Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. The name of his spaceship was Vostok 1. If you got that, I'm a Dutchman. Now, the next question is, the US Masters golf tournament finished today. In 1991, wow, as long ago as that, Tiger Woods won the first of his 5 titles at Augusta. What age was he then? A, 23, B, 21, C, 19. I promise you the answer to that right after the break.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that, at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
Well, the sharp-eyed amongst you and the golfers amongst you have already noticed that in 1991, Tiger Woods was still at school. I meant to say 1997, when Tiger won the first of his 5 titles. He was 21 years old. Now, you saw the trailer for the Killing Kelly film. There's still tickets left available for the Oxford Town Hall showing on the 25th of this month. So if you want to see the film with me and hear me introduce it and answer your questions after the film, get your tickets now. That's Oxford Town Hall, Monday the 25th of April at 7 p.m. Now let's go to the phones. People reacting in very large numbers to tonight's stories. Let's go to New York first to talk with Daniel. Daniel, welcome to the mother of all talk shows.
Hi, thank you so much, George. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really a great admirer of yours, and I always appreciate you covering topics that have been missed by the mainstream. You're very welcome, George.
Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to cover with you what's happening in Pakistan, and I know you've touched with your guests, and I think they a very comprehensive coverage. But what I'm seeing from here is really a continuation of a neocolonialism project. happening there. There's really, like if you look at the protests that are happening right now in Pakistan across all the cities, you notice, first of all, the mainstream media is not covering it there. And second, you see that people are really passionate, and they're talking about continuation of the fight for freedom. And one of the things that colonialism does, is basically destroy the institutions. All of the institutions in this case have failed, and now what we're left with is a democratic government that's been ousted by a foreign influence, and it reminds me of the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. And I just wanted to see, where do you see this going? I mean, this can get really, really ugly because, as you mentioned, Imran Khan's life is in danger. So I wanted to just kind of,
And Daniel, it's paradoxically more in danger the bigger these protests become. Because, of course, if they become uncontrollable, irresistible, then Imran Khan will be swept back into power. And if he's swept back into power, he's going to deal with these corrupt and failed institutions that were the tool for the United States in effecting this regime change operation. Imran Khan has cleverly pitched this argument as a new freedom struggle, as an anti-colonial struggle. And you are quite right to highlight it, that Pakistan could, I know it very well, only too well, Pakistan could be an economic miracle. It has this landmass, this gigantic population, 220 million, this seaboard in Karachi, in Sindh, this access to the Chinese market, to the Asian market, to the Middle East and Gulf market. It has an Islamic importance amongst the 2 billion or more Muslims in the world. It is potentially a superpower. But as long as it remains shackled to the former and now neo-colonial powers of the West, which is 10% of the world's population and very, very far away, then it can never realize its potential. So I think that the coming struggle will determine whether Pakistan is a free country or a vassal state, whether the Pakistanis are free men and women or whether they are slaves. And I've got little doubt as to what the final outcome of that struggle will be. The problem for Imran Khan is the more powerful and successful this movement becomes, and I just looked at the demonstrations. I think it's in Islamabad, but it is truly not a sea of people, it is an ocean of people. And if that is being reflected in other cities, particularly in Lahore, which is Imran Khan's own hometown, home city, then that will be very, very significant indeed. Daniel, thanks for that call. Martin is in England, in County Durham, on the Ukraine. Go ahead, Martin.
Hello, George. Nice to speak to you. It's to do with Zelensky. Am I the only person in the UK who doesn't see him as a messiah? Because everybody's falling over him, praising him, when I think he's a con man.
No, you're not the only person. There's thee and me, right. And I suspect a larger number than you and I. I think that he gives the impression of enjoying this war rather too much. He is basking in the international adulation and counting his winnings. And of course, he already, according to the Pandora Papers, was revealed to be an extremely rich man, the richest comedian in all human history. And he was a comedian in Ukraine, one of the poorest countries in the European continent. So it's not quite clear how he got so rich, but his future is well set. That is for sure. I ask you to recall, Martin, that he was elected to make peace with Russia. That was his platform. That was, one must presume, his intention, to heal the breach with the eastern half of the country and heal the breach with Russia. But he has not been able to do that, even if he wanted to. First of all, because the United States, and NATO is the United States, let's not beat about the bush on that, and the far right in Ukraine would not let him do so. And they will not let him now, even if he wanted to bring about reconciliation, bring about a negotiated settlement. So, no, I think the day will come, Martin, where people will say to you, as they will say to me, hey, you were right about that guy all along. We were lied to. We were fooled. Thanks very much for that call. Will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? Yes, 66% on the Twitter. Yes, 68% on YouTube. And yes, 71% on the Telegram channel. I've got so much. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, you can donate to the show using the Super Chat. Just £10 or $10. We'll take any currency you like. Many of you are saying you'd like to donate in Bitcoin. Please write to us on that. If the email address can be put up on the ticker tape, please. It's onair@MOATS. Yeah, onair@moats.tv. Please put it up on the screen. Zach says it's possible that Marine Le Pen will be the next Donald Trump, but she probably has a lot more class than Trump had. Not so sure about that. Seji Sundarakishan says, yes, in the sense that it would be earth-shattering if she wins. No, in the sense that she's not a showman or woman like Trump. Seasoned politician, could do consequential things if elected. Alan says, isn't it a shame there is no alternative in the UK? Alan, that's an important point. You see, Trump's victory and Le Pen's threat to the presidency of Macron and Mélenchon's threat, 20% he's now standing at in the count, 20%. He's a man like me with the same politics as me, Mélenchon. You couldn't slip sixpence between me and Mélenchon. 20% of the vote when he's got a centrist president and a right-wing challenger like Marine Le Pen. What we have in this country, and I think in the United States, and many other countries too, but not in France, is a bankrupt left, which is a monstrosity of liberalism. It is the antithesis of anything that could be described as working class socialist politics, and a bankrupt Blairism. That's what Macron represents. That's what Clinton represented. But there's no alternative in Britain and in the United States. I'm doing my best, but so far I'm well short of that. Richard is in Wales. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Richard.
Hi, George. Nice to talk to you again. The second time to talk.
And you. Well done, sir. Good.
It's twofold. The first one is, what on earth would the UK suffer if we were to declare ourselves politically neutral? Second
Nothing. We would gain enormously. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, my bad. Second part is, what on earth has the US got over us that we can't let go of them?
Well, these are two good questions. I'm the leader of a political party called the Workers' Party of Britain, and our very first point on our 10-point program is withdrawal from NATO and from the imperialist wars that NATO has been unleashing across the globe. And that's for a reason, because we stand for the independence of Britain. We're already now independent of the EU, de jure, but not de facto. In fact, our policies towards the world, Russia, China, and everything else, is essentially the same as the EU's. But we're not at all independent of the United States of America. In fact, the United States has just kicked us like a cur to the side of the road over the issue of a trade deal with the United States. Biden doesn't want to know about any trade deal with the United Kingdom. As a matter of fact, the Americans are interfering even in the internal affairs of the United Kingdom. Why should we be any different? So there's no special relationship from their point of view. If we had a policy, I mentioned George Marcello earlier, the legendary leader of the PCF, the French Communist Party, who was, although he could never be elected because he was a communist, he was the quintessential French man. He was easily, personally, the most popular politician in France. His stance was socialism in the colors of France. Keep our rockets and point them both ways. Point them at the United States and point them at the then Soviet Union to defend France. This was a kind of internationalist gaullism that really appealed to French people. Now, if we in Britain spent our money, the money we've given to Zelensky for armaments, could have been used to rebuild the British armed forces, apart from anything else. Our armed forces are in a state of absolute decay, and you could fit them all into Aston Villa's football stadium. And for those watching abroad who don't know Aston Villa, that is by no means the biggest stadium in Britain, but all of our armed forces could fit in there. We don't have enough soldiers to guard the Queen at Buckingham Palace, but we're giving weapons and money to foreign countries for their defense. You may recall we sent forces to the Polish border with Belarus, whilst people were arriving every day on our own coast from France as illegal migrants in boats, and we couldn't stop them because we didn't have the military resources so to do. So I strongly believe in the independence of Britain. Automatically a friend of none, automatically an enemy of none. Treating each individual case that arises on the globe on its own merits and standing up above all for the people of Britain. I think that's a winning formula myself, and I'm going to dedicate the rest of my time here to winning people to it. Thanks, Richard. Let's go to California. Who wouldn't want to? Where Rashid is on the line. Go ahead, Rashid.
Hey, George, I have 2 points, sir. One, I just want to notify the audience that today would have been the 43rd anniversary of the birth of the beautiful, amazing Rachel Corrie. And March 16th was the 19th anniversary of a horrific murder by the IDF, where she went as a young person to defend the rights of Palestinians to maintain their homes during these horrendous, almost 70 years of brutal military occupation, economic occupation, and just almost slow-motion genocide. And she's a young woman who's cut in your own cloth, George. She took the challenge of being an activist and didn't make it just speaking out in public at her home in Washington State, but she went out into the fields, and she did that. And that would lead me to my second point, is that we understand the corporate left has no interest in working people or any people that are not part of their clique. And we also understand that people such as yourself, George, are fighting the battle, the good battle for workers, for people who are just trying to make ends meet. But the real sad point is that the intellectual members of that group, the people who should be speaking out for these things, in the last 5 to 10 years, and probably longer if you've been paying attention, have really shown their complicity in this war against working people.
and then in the case of the Ukraine, where they should be seeing things clearly, are happy to go along with mass murder, happy to push Europe to a world war for the benefit of a small elite who couldn't care less what happens to Ukraine, what happens to the United States, what happens to Russia, or what happens to people around the world in terms of their economic damage. And that's why I go back to Rachel. She had the courage that many of these people do not. You have the courage, and I hope that you can use your platform, George, to get those other early-stage workers' parties around the world a brief moment to say, what is the news from Burundi? What is the news from South Africa? What is the news from Argentina? Because we have to unite, because the battle is not just Ukraine, it's the world, and we know who the main target is.
Rashid, that is an absolutely stunningly brilliant call, one of the best calls that we've ever had on the show. I'm touched by what you have said, and it was blinding in its clarity. The so-called left, including so-called communists, are on the march in the streets demanding more NATO war. If this was 1914, they'd be on the streets demanding war on the Hun. It is astounding. The so-called official left, they're not the official left as far as I'm concerned, but their support for imperialist war in the Ukraine is simply stunning, as was your call. Let's go to David in Nottingham in England. Go ahead, David.
George, I'd like to say, George, that I think that this whole Ukraine thing is all to do with Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. But also, I think never let a good crisis go to waste. So the militaries of Europe are dumping the useless weapons that are going to cost them, don't know how many billions to decommission, because it must be quite a lot to dispose of explosives and military equipment.
The shelves have got to be refilled now.
Yeah, so they need the space, so they're just using Ukraine as a dump to dump all the old stuff on. And I think while the world's looking over at Ukraine, I think the real action is them setting up a NATO-style thing in the Solomon Islands against China.
Well, there's going to be a very serious confrontation over the Solomon Islands. I don't know if everyone is aware of it.
Target, George.
Yeah, maybe we should get a guest on that, Dave.
Yeah,
well, there's no doubt that if unchecked, China will be the most important country in the world in a very few years' time. That's one of the reasons why all my children are learning Chinese. The reality is that the Chinese are already the biggest manufacturing country on the earth that the earth has ever seen, and their GDP, while still lagging the Americans, is much more productive GDP. I mean, our GDP counts the bloated salaries of lawyers and the rest, but Chinese GDP is based on real things. But in any case, Chinese GDP will overtake the United States in a very, very short period of time. And the key point in what I said, Dave, was if unchecked. So they are planning to check it. And the Solomon Islands is shaping up to be a flashpoint of great importance. So we're going to turn to that next week. Now, please, I need you to donate to keep the show going on PayPal. It's PayPal, there it is there. PayPal.me/George Galloway UK. Don't forget the UK, because we don't want to go into the wrong person. So it's paypal.me/George Galloway UK. We have to cover the cost of the show. We did cover it last week entirely. In fact, there was room for a cake, which I just brought in for my colleagues to eat before this show began. You did magnificently well last week, but we need to do it every week until we can find a corporate sponsor. And a corporate sponsor is welcome as long as they don't interfere in any way in the content of the show. Now, let me go to a break. Did I give the answer to the Tiger Woods one? He was 21, of course, when he won. But here's the next one. This week in 1912, the Titanic, the world's largest ocean liner, hit an iceberg, allegedly, at 11:40 p.m. off Newfoundland and sank early next morning. Who directed the movie? A. James Cameron, B. Steven Spielberg, C. George Lucas. No disrespect to all those that lost their lives on board the ship, of course. Let me take a quick break. Peter says, the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show, best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
T-minus. Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
We need to acclimatise the public for the introduction of extraterrestrials, because come to the conclusion at this point, if they're going to come, they are going to come soon.
Back in the late 60s and early 70s, they actually saw the saucer land in front of them or pass by in New York or go overhead.
It went in front of my eyes up and turned into what looked like a star way up in the sky.
They said the same line that you just made, and it was amazing. It is an awful waste of space if we are all that there is. If we're all that there is. Exactly.
Have you ever seen any of these phenomena?
I have seen energy entities. One looked like a massive jellyfish. The other one looked like a massive centipede.
Well, you had me up to that point. Now I just think you're stark raving mad.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, the answer to the question was James Cameron, the director of the movie Titanic. Will Marine Le Pen be the next Donald Trump? You can vote on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Telegram. Big thanks to the person who in the first 2 minutes of the show donated £440. I really take my hat off to you. But there's not enough people following that up, so PayPal me, paypal.me/George Galloway. It's coming up on the screen constantly. We need to cover the cost of the show. Now, Suzanne David says, my wish for Europe is that Marine Le Pen wins this election. And MCR McGrr says, if she's anything like Orban, then that's another loss for the totalitarian EU plans to dominate. And Norman, a.k.a. Dapper Rapper, great name, says globalization is a dead duck. Its champions all discredited. Worse, in the last 2 years, they have been exposed as rampant authoritarians. There is a difference between localism and nationalism. However, at the moment, voters have only the national populist on the ballot papers. And George says, I hope she gets elected to stick it to the corporate elites. Jacob says, sorry, I don't trust the French elections. About 75% of the people will say no to Macron, but still somehow he'll be able to become the president again. And Sean says there's no truth anymore. All reality is filtered through the big tech / big business. The Ministry of Peace and Truth are working overtime. And Hector says she's a nationalist, not a globalist. Her ideas are realistic for the present. I hope she wins. And Marek says she could be the next Donald Trump, but she's got to win the election first. Some see her as the devil personified, but I don't believe she's all bad. And Ernest says, George, that shows how disappointed people are in Europe. People want change, even if that means supporting a Jean-Marie Le Pen offspring. Let's go to the switchboard where Peter from Warrington wants to talk about France. Go ahead, Peter.
Oh, hi, George. How are you?
Hi. Hi, good, thanks.
What I'd like to say is that I think we're talking about the wrong Le Pen. I believe Marcello Le Pen is the correct one to go for. She's the niece of Marine Le Pen.
She's the niece, yeah. I've never seen her or know much about her. Tell us, Peter.
Well, she's younger. She's age 32, and I think she's more dynamic, and I think she's the right person to go for. And I think the French people would get behind her more so than Marine Le Pen.
And what are the key differences politically between her and her aunt?
I'm not sure about that. I suspect they're on the same page politically, but I think France needs a younger premier. And I think failing that...
Well, Macron's pretty young. The cult of youth has never appealed to me. The older I get, the less it appeals. But Macron was the new Tony Blair, and he's been a disaster for France.
Well, look, George, I think Macron is a puppet, and I think you probably know that deep down as well. So I don't
Well,
think
he's less of a puppet than the other leaders, but he's still a puppet, you're right. And the yellow vest movement in France, completely ignored by the so-called left and completely ignored by the mainstream media, represented, I think, a core of French identity, don't you?
I'm not sure. And do you know what? I actually think that sporting people would make better leaders than some of these politicians. And in France's case, I'd go for somebody like the top tennis player, Guy Forget, would be a good choice, or somebody like Laurent Blanc, ex-footballer, would be good for France. I think
I don't know. We've got a comedian in charge of Ukraine, and that's not working out very well. But interesting thoughts, Peter.
He's not a sports person. I mean,
Blanc. I like Blanc as a player, but I don't think I'd vote for him as president of the Republic. Good call, though. Thanks, Peter, for that. Let me read one or two other social media, because I've got literally hundreds here. I highly doubt that Le Pen will be the next Donald Trump, because Macron dances to the tune of French secret society that runs through the entire European Union. So in summation, Le Pen is already lost even before it begun. That's from Luthi, L-U-T-H-I. And Jari says, well, anyway, what you hope and what you expect to happen is two different things. And nowadays you can't find right and left anymore. It's total chaos. And Nicholas Jones says, I voted yes in your poll because the liberal elites are more interested in promoting good causes, waving blue and yellow flags and clapping carers, than standing up for the disempowered, the disenfranchised, the uninsured, and the downright bleeding pissed off. Let's go to Montana. Who wouldn't want to? Where William awaits. William in Montana, welcome to the show.
Hello, sir. It's an honor. This is the second time I spoke to you once before. I have a couple of questions, and they're in really two very different directions. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, have you ever heard of Tanquake?
No.
I think you should maybe look into that. You're familiar with Bill Benny, right? William Benny? Possibly.
Enlighten us.
Well, he designed all the system that they're spying on all of us with here in the U.S. And he was, he's an intelligence guy deep into it, and he, bailed and whistleblowed and told how he tried to get this system to not. He had a better way for this system to work where they wouldn't. But anyway, you should look into him first off. I'm surprised that you don't know about him, because this is
so
I think
much
maybe
I don't
something.
know.
I know something that's upcoming is, but Panquake, the way I understand it, and you know more than I do about all this stuff, but they're developing a system, and the way I understand it, it would be like YouTube, except it's more, it's supposedly more modern. This Bill Benny is involved in this, to where I understand it, where it's just individual. I mean, they don't collect your information. It's just different. Please look into it, and maybe
I
you
will.
could
I
even
promise
give it
you. I'll look into him, and I'll
show.
look into I'll look into him. I'll look into Panquake. I do want to encourage people to watch the live stream now on Rumble and on Getter, because we simply have to multiply the number of platforms that we're going out on, so to make us less vulnerable to the kind of censorship that William in Montana is nervous about, and he's right to be nervous about. Thanks, Bill. Richard is in Canada. Let's go north to Canada. Go on, Rich.
Oh, hello, sir. I'd just like to bring about the discussion back to the war in Yugoslavia and what's occurring in Ukraine. When I landed in Zagreb in 1994, I was greeted by American soldiers. American soldiers were in Yugoslavia 6 months before the war, and they were there on the presence of a NATO exercise, but they were there to help plan the war. We had CIA agents in our area and such, but
no doubt about that. No doubt. They were planning the breakup of Yugoslavia for many decades, Richard. The BBC had a radio station for every language group in Yugoslavia. They had a particular hatred of Yugoslavia. They were determined to destroy it for many reasons. The Germans were desperate to destroy it because, of course, Yugoslavia liberated itself from German occupation and took a very heavy toll on the German armed forces. They never forgave the partisans led by Tito of Yugoslavia. Go ahead, Rich. Last point to you.
Oh, yes. So for the last 8 years, as America and NATO have been creeping towards Russia with the encirclements of their armaments and giving gifts in kind to Ukraine, I see the exact same kind of scenario. And still, to this day, there are NATO troops in Yugoslavia. And there will always be this will be the beginning of a NWO world order.
They're not just in Yugoslavia. They have created and unilaterally declared a state called Kosovo, which is in fact nothing more than a NATO protectorate. It's also, of course, Europe's biggest source of sex trafficking, drugs and weapons and crime of all kinds, whilst being a NATO protectorate. So NATO's role, far from keeping the peace, has been to sow division and war. And that's what is, as you say, playing out in Ukraine now. Now, coming up in the next hour, we've got Mint Press journalist and tremendous filmmaker Dan Cohen. He's talking about Joe Biden and his gradual destruction of the United States of America. Plus a new poll about Rishi Sunak. News, Elliot King.
news. Voting in the first round of the French presidential election has now closed, with the incumbent Emmanuel Macron facing a far-right challenger in Marine Le Pen. 49 million people are eligible to decide which 2 of 12 candidates should take part in the runoff vote. But the indications are that less than half of voters have turned out the lowest for 20 years. The campaign has been overshadowed first by the COVID-19 pandemic and then Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Macron has spent little time on the race, focusing instead on Europe's reaction to the war. One issue more than any other has predominated the election: the spiralling costs of living in energy bills and shopping baskets. When he came to power with a new party in 2017, Emmanuel Macron swept away the old allegiances, and the 2 big parties are still nursing their wounds. Socialist candidate Anne Hidalgo has struggled to be heard, while on the right Valérie Pécresse has failed to excite the Republicans. Now the main challenger to Macron is coming from Le Pen on the far right and Jean-Luc Mélenchon on the left. A Whitehall inquiry is underway into how the tax affairs of UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak's wife were leaked to the media. Akshata Murthy has said that she will now pay UK tax on her overseas earnings following a row over her non-domiciled status. She owns 700 million in shares of the Indian IT giant Infosys, founded by her father, from which she received 11.6 million in dividend income last year. Labour has said the rows raise questions about Sunak's judgment. As a non-domiciled or non-dom UK resident, Murthy is not required by law to pay UK taxes on her overseas income. This would have saved her £2.1 million a year in UK tax. After details of her non-dom status appeared in the press on Wednesday evening, Sunak said his wife had not done anything wrong and it was unfair to attack her as a private citizen. But on Friday, his wife announced she would change her tax arrangements. Health Secretary Sajid Javid has now become the latest cabinet minister to find his private financial arrangements under scrutiny, as he admitted to being a non-dom in the past. Javid, who lived and worked in New York and Singapore during his career as a banker at Chase Manhattan and Deutsche Bank, also disclosed that becoming a minister, he had held some financial investments in an offshore trust. Labour accused the Health Secretary of hypocrisy after he and other ministers spent much of last week defending a rise in national insurance that is aimed at putting more money into the NHS. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has been ousted from power after losing a no-confidence vote in his leadership. The vote was held past midnight after opposition parties brought a motion against him following days of drama. The motion was first brought last week, but the former cricket star blocked it by dissolving Parliament. Sunday's vote took place after the country's Supreme Court ruled in favour of opposition parties and said that Khan had acted unconstitutionally. Opposition leader Shehbaz Sharif, who is expected to be chosen as the next Prime Minister tomorrow, said Pakistan and its parliament were finally freed from a serious crisis, adding in a tweet, "Congratulations to the Pakistan nation on a new dawn." If voted in by Parliament, Sharif, a long-time rival of Khan and brother of former 3-time Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, would be able to hold power until October 2023, when the next election is due to be held. Khan has accused the United States of being behind his ousting. Congestion chaos at the British port of Dover is reportedly costing transport companies £800 per lorry, as British haulers of perishable goods complain the long waiting times are causing products to go bad. The suspension of P&O ferry services at the terminals, as well as Easter traffic, IT issues and bad weather have led to lengthy queues for transporters. Haulers of perishable goods now want to be given priority at the busy port in Kent. One meat hauler, Eardley International, said lorries were experiencing delays of 20 to 25 hours to cross the channel. Company director Graham Eardley explained the company, which is based in Lockerbie in Scotland, takes fresh meat from the UK into Europe. Police have begun an investigation after Manchester United star Cristiano Ronaldo appeared to slap a young fan's phone to the ground after his side's defeat to Everton yesterday. Footage shared on Twitter shows Cristiano Ronaldo throwing his right hand towards the ground as he left the Goodison Park pitch yesterday, after what appears to be a phone bouncing out of a spectator's hand and onto the ground. The fan's mother has claimed her 14-year-old son, Jake Harding, was left bruised by the incident, which left the youngster in complete shock. Cristiano Ronaldo apologised for the incident on Instagram and has invited the fan to a match at Old Trafford. 2 airline passengers accused of unruly behaviour have been hit with the largest fines ever proposed by the US Federal Aviation Administration. The 5-figure penalties on the 2 flyers accused of violence are part of a $2 million or £1.5 million in fines levied this year. US airlines have seen record numbers of disruptive passengers since early 2021, with many incidents involving the refusal to wear any antiviral face masks. And finally, a set of rare notebooks filled with notes by Charles Darwin have been anonymously returned to the University of Cambridge over 20 years after they were initially reported missing. The 2 notebooks, one of which includes Darwin's famous 1837 Tree of Life sketch, were returned to Cambridge University's library last month. The university said in a statement, "They were left outside the librarian's office and wrapped in plastic inside a pink gift bag with a brown envelope containing the notebook's archive box and an unsigned printed note which simply read, 'Librarian, Happy Easter.' The precious items, which the university believes are worth millions, were discovered missing during a routine check in January 2001. When it was revealed that the small box contained the notebooks, it had not been returned to its correct place. Following an exhaustive search spanning almost 2 decades, the university officially declared the notebooks missing and likely stolen in November 2021. A happy return indeed. That's all your news on MOATS. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
A big thanks to the 6,000 people who voted on the first poll, and overwhelmingly, 2/3, 3/4 of the respondents think that Le Pen may well be the next Donald Trump. But here's the second poll of the night. Should Rishi Sunak resign? I explained at the beginning the truly extraordinary circumstances, facts, in which the man charged with collecting British taxes has a wife who is a billionaire who has been dodging British taxes, and that he himself had a US green card in his pocket just in case the going got rough. You couldn't make this up. Now, Sunak has asked, this is laughable, this is how very British is this. Sunak has asked his next door neighbour, the British Prime Minister, who appointed him and on whose sufferance he remains in office, to refer himself to the independent arbitrator of ministerial conduct. What could possibly go wrong with that? So should Rishi Sunak resign? It's on Twitter, it's on YouTube, and it's on Telegram. You can vote for the next hour. Now, Dan Cohen is one of my very favourite American journalists and broadcasters, and I'm delighted to welcome him to the mother of all talk shows this evening. Dan, it's day 445, I think, of Joe Biden's presidency. The minimum wage is still $7.50. How has he been doing?
Well, if you believe the polls as well as reality, then Joe Biden has had a terrible presidency so far. I mean, some say it might be, one of, if not the worst president ever among them. I mean, his polls show it. He's hovering around 30%. So 70% of Americans do not approve of Joe Biden. He narrowly won against Trump, an incredibly unpopular president, largely thanks to the pandemic. Biden won. He's overseen a disastrous economic situation. Inflation is at its highest in 40 years. We have horrible poverty across the country. I think inflation's at like 8% now. Skyrocketing housing prices. So it's really just a disaster all around. And Biden's messaging has been that this is all Vladimir Putin's fault. That your economic situation here in the U.S., if you're struggling, that It has nothing to do with the policies that, the Uniparty has enacted year after year and term after term. But this is all because Vladimir Putin decided to invade a peaceful, sovereign Woodstock 2022 in Kiev. And he's actually termed it Putin's price hike. And that's a reference to the massive increase in gas prices that are around $5 a gallon throughout the country, which, if you're wealthy, then that doesn't make a big difference to you. But for quite a large segment of the population here, that's makes it basically unbearable, where you can't get around and do your job or do basic things. So all of that anger and frustration, the Biden administration is trying to redirect again into support for basically a U.S. dirty war in Ukraine.
I wish it was $5 a gallon here in this country, Dan. I've got to tell you, British viewers will be scratching their head about that. But of course, $5 a gallon in America is a gargantuan price because it's always been so historically low in your country. The problem with that Joe Biden alibi is that the war in Ukraine is not even 2 months old. The American economy's problems predate it by a very, very long way.
Precisely. I mean, we've seen inflation skyrocketing over the past year. That was long before any Russian tank crossed over the border into Ukraine. These are a result of at-home economic policies and that basically have been a severe attack, just another severe attack on the American working class, on American poor people. I mean, I think about, we've also had the destruction of the economy that came through lockdowns, where basically small businesses were forced to close for large amounts of 2020 when Trump was still president, and then into 2021. And that destruction has not been rectified. People haven't been helped because of that. I think of my neighbor who was evicted from his home along with 12 other people in his family, and lost his job working in a restaurant because of lockdown. So it's just one thing after the next, and there's really no hope in sight. I mean, it's true that, so Democrats are going to basically probably get massacred in midterms. So then we have Republicans who are they actually going to do anything better for American workers? I think you'd have to be a fool to think so. So it's really, I think actually the ruling class and Biden's advisors just they see his approval ratings the same way that they see the Azov battalion and Ukraine in general. It's cannon fodder for an agenda. Ukraine is cannon fodder for war, for the U.S.'s kind of holy war against Russia. And Biden's term, his approval ratings are cannon fodder. His entire presidency is cannon fodder for war against the working class here in the U.S.
So, Dan, is all this frenetic international activity by the Biden administration, not just against Russia, but also against China, this constant emphasis on military intervention, sanctions against half the population of the earth are under American sanctions, whilst complete inattention to the needs of the mass of the American people. Is this all just displacement activity, or is one the causation of the other?
So your question is sorry, I don't totally understand the question. Go ahead, George.
Well, what I'm saying is, is he hyperactive overseas because he simply can't solve the problems of America? Or are the problems of America in part a result of the hyperactivity overseas?
Right. So which came first? I think it's kind of a which came first, the chicken or the egg conundrum. I think what we have is an empire in decline. And so certainly by going to war in Ukraine, all of the provocations that the U.S. and NATO were carrying out in Ukraine, while the media was saying, "Oh, Russian troops are amassing on Ukraine's borders," as if it wasn't inside Russia. All of this certainly serves as a very convenient distraction from everything happening here in the United States, from the economic devastation that people are suffering. But I think it only really resonates with a small amount of the population. I mean, you see that in his approval ratings, which are, as I said, about 30%. But also, look at who's flying Ukrainian flags around the United States. If you go, I live in a low-income neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, basically. No one's flying Ukrainian flags around here. If you go across the river into Capitol Hill, into the center of power in Washington, D.C., there are Ukrainian flags everywhere. And these are people, who believe that this is what the United States should be doing, or perhaps they're benefiting from it. Maybe they're a weapons contractor. So I think this war serves as a very convenient distraction, but it's kind of hard to separate them because, war abroad also brings, it changes the economy at home. We've seen a very strong process of gentrification, for example, here in the United States over the last years, something that accelerates as more and more money goes into the war machine.
Extraordinary. Now, you rightly pointed out that the Republicans and the Democrats are Tweedledee and Tweedledum, or as I put it, less culturally polished, two cheeks of the same ass. But of course, they are the only two cheeks that people currently can vote for. In which case, it's quite likely, as you say, that the Democrats will take a drubbing at the midterms in November. Is Trump going to run again, in your view? And if he will he succeed?
I hate to speculate and make predictions. I think Trump remains the face of the Republican Party, and he's certainly remaining active, even though he's been censored and banned on social media. He's created his own social media site and this kind of thing, and he's doing events that, frankly, are popular. There was one a few months ago in the middle of Alabama, in the middle of nowhere, and there were tens of thousands of people there. Joe Biden, there's no way he could, or Kamala Harris, or whoever, the Democrats are going to run in 2024. There's no way they could attract 40,000 people or 50,000 people to the middle of, to some forgotten place in the middle of nowhere. So Trump still commands a very strong following. There's so much that can happen between now and then. I think one of the Republicans to watch out for is Ron DeSantis, who throughout the pandemic has really made a name for himself. I think he has a very strong chance of becoming the Republican candidate and actually even winning, particularly because Democrats, they have nobody. They can't field anybody. I mean, they had to go with Joe Biden and just basically his celebrity off of being the vice president during the Obama years. But, Kamala Harris, nobody likes her. She didn't win a single delegate in her home state of California. She can't debate at all. She's just incredibly unpopular. Whoever Republicans run, Democrats are going to have an incredibly difficult time defeating them again.
It's fascinating, I must say. Dan Cohen, thanks for joining us. Hope we see you again soon on the mother of all talk shows. 2,000 people have voted already. Should Rishi Sunak resign? Yes, 77. On YouTube, yes, 81. On Telegram, yes, 89. You can still vote right up to the end of the show. Let's go to Hawaii. Who wouldn't? Hawaii 5-0, where Matteo awaits. Go ahead, Matteo.
Hello, my friend. Long-time listener, fourth-time caller. I want to talk about a book by Sun Tzu called The Art of War. And I'm wondering if you're familiar with that.
Okay, yes.
That is required reading by all military leaders across the planet. Everybody should know what is in that book. Now, let me tell you what's happening with Putin and the propaganda machines that are happening in the East and the West. The West is saying that Putin is retreating and failing and all of these sorts of things. But let me give you a little example of Sun Tzu's Art of War and how Putin is utilizing it. He went up into looking like he was going to attack Kiev. He amassed a massive amount of military around that area. Okay? And then what happened? The propaganda machine of the West said that he was retreating from that area because of all of the great help that we've given the Ukraine. But in fact, that was a trick in order for Putin to amass his military around the southern and eastern ends of Ukraine. Does anybody understand the propaganda machine? The West propaganda machine is telling its people that Putin is failing and he's a nutcase and all this stuff. The East propaganda machine is saying that he's fighting against a machine that's pushing up against his borders called NATO and the EU. What is your opinion about this?
Well, overwhelmingly, the Russian people support the action of their armed forces, and the opinion poll ratings of Putin have never been higher. Indeed, nobody ever in Russia has gotten opinion poll ratings like it. And before anyone shouts fix, let me say that the polling company concerned is owned and controlled by the opposition parties in Russia. He is something like 87% popular, the war something like 83% popular. So most people in Russia are more concerned about whether or not the war will be called off by the Russian leadership, concerned about international ostracism and the rest before its objectives are reached. So I am not sure that you're right, that Putin did not intend to take Kiev. I rather think he did. I rather think that he thought that an uprising would occur in Kiev and that a new political power would emerge in Kiev that was ready to do business with Russia. It may even be the case that they paid people to rise up, and it may be the case that those they paid ran off with the money without conducting the uprising. But hey, what do I know? I don't speak for Russia. I don't know their mind. I am not them. But that's my honest appraisal of it, Matteo. But in any case, it was never, I'm sure, the intention of the Russians to occupy all of Ukraine. I do think that the longer the war goes on, their plan will be to occupy much more of it than they might have been intending to occupy at the beginning, or indeed before it began. When it began, the Russian demands were minimal, as Lavrov put them. They were essentially for the implementation of the Minsk agreement, guaranteed by Germany and France and signed by the regime in Kiev. But of course, these war aims have expanded now. Not only is the independence of Crimea now a given, it will never ever be given up. Not only is the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk now a given, will never be given up, but the Mariupol port, which allows a land bridge to the Crimean Peninsula, will never be given up. And the longer the war goes on, the more of the Azov shoreline and so on that may never be given up will be taken and held. A link up with Transnistria will then become a significant war aim of the Russians. So It's in Ukraine's interest. It was in Ukraine's interest to declare its neutrality, declare that it would never join any military bloc, that it would never allow any military forces from foreign countries onto their soil, and to accept these other demands. But now that they have refused to do so, and so much blood has been spilled in their refusal to do so, it's difficult to see where this war ends, and I certainly cannot see it. Matteo, thanks for that. Anthony is in Detroit. Let's go to Motortown. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Oh, hey, George. Yeah, it's terrible. They say Putin, he's attacking our democracy and he's hiking our prices. He's quite a magician, you know, Putin. But, you know, they got their Supreme Court justice in this week, and just in time for Roe versus Wade and abortion to just become a big issue again. And, you know, as we saw, Obama, he's really still in charge when he was there. And, you know, Nancy Pelosi, she
he's the boss.
Her trip to
Did you see the pictures of everyone mobbing Obama and leaving poor old Joe standing literally alone?
Oh, that's so sad. And you know what's funny? The only people I saw getting pictures with Joe Biden were our supposedly progressive squad, you know, AOC and the like. They were putting their pictures with Joe Biden after. So what is that even? No one appreciates, no one, yeah. He was doddering old fool. And Nancy Pelosi had to cancel her trip to Taiwan, ostensibly due to COVID, you know, but was she feeling under the weather due to the warnings from the Chinese, or was it because they're kicking around the idea of banning congressional stock trading right now? Who knows?
I think that if she had gone to Taiwan, the mother of all crises with China would have emerged. I think they would have treated that as virtually an act of war. Anthony, thanks as always for that call. Karine is in Peterborough in England. Let's talk with her. Karine, welcome.
Oh, hi. Firstly, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Mr. Galloway, and it's also a pleasure to speak with everybody who's listening. So what I have to say is that people, it regards Britain, sorry to be a little bit, you know, just like kind of British at the moment, but there we go. People are freezing here, and it's, you know, and we've got a whole winter, and we'll have a few weeks of summer, and then we'll have the winter. And the gas prices here, I mean, by gas I mean, you know, the fuel that heats our homes.
Not petrol.
Yeah, I just thought I'd make that clear for the American audience.
They're up, yeah, quite. But the gas prices have already risen 54%. And right. That has partly been mitigated. It would have been bigger by the state, by the government, but they'll not be able to keep on doing that. So it's quite possible that by next winter, gas prices will have risen by 100%.
And it's shocking. And also at the, you know, when we go to the supermarket, the food prices are just going up and up every time you visit. Yeah. And yet, when we turn on our television screens or we turn on the news, we find out that, you know, like, oh, yet again, Mr. Johnson, our Prime Minister, has been, you know, over to Kiev to go and give them more money. I mean, they've already raised, what, something like 53 billion or something, and then the EU's giving them another 11 billion, and it's just, we're talking like telephone numbers being given to Kiev, and yet all the people in Europe are paying for it. And you know, Ukraine, I'm sorry to say this, Ukraine isn't part of Europe, and it's not part of NATO. And
it's not part of the EU, it's not part of NATO, it's certainly not part of Britain, but the taxpayers in the NATO countries, the taxpayers in the EU, and the taxpayers in the UK are throwing money, telephone numbers, as you correctly put it, a country they could not have picked out on the map just 7 weeks ago.
Yeah, and what I want to know is, I mean, like, where is the opposition, and where is our free speech, and our, you know, why can't we hear, you know, why can't we have RT on YouTube, for example, and why can't we listen to the other side, and where is all the money going?
Well, that's a very good question that will spend a lot of years repenting on at leisure where's the money going. Some of it, a lot of it is going up in smoke, but a lot of it is going into the pockets of the oligarchy around the Kiev regime, and maybe even to people who are part of the Kiev regime. There's as much transparency, Corinne, on money going to Ukraine as there was on the money we spent on the COVID pandemic and the response to it. That is to say, no transparency at all. It is important, the call you have made. I think you speak for England in that. And I think that as the months go on and we calculate the bill and we know more about where the money's gone, you will not be a minority voice at all. Now, 96 football fans were crushed to death in 1989 in this week, and 766 were injured during an FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. In which city did this tragedy happen? A, Birmingham, B, London, C, Sheffield. Answer after a very brief break.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland, even the European, which he then owned, all over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
The disaster took place, of course, in the city of Sheffield. 96 people died, one subsequently died, so now we campaign for justice for the 97. And while substantial steps forward have been taken, I think everyone would agree that proper justice for the 97 has not yet been achieved. Have you seen the pictures of the crowds in Pakistan? It's absolutely unbelievable. Imran Khan has ignited a massive nationwide uprising against what he calls the imported government of crooks that have supplanted him. If this momentum keeps up, then Imran Khan might be back, and then I'm sure those who have engineered this coup will pay a considerable price. I've known Imran Khan for a very long time. I interviewed him when we were young, There it is there. I look younger, actually, in comparison. But he, with the cares of office, of running a country of 220 million people in the teeth of all of the problems that exist in Pakistan, has aged a bit. His hair's grey, mine's under a hat. Well, Imran Khan is now pulling millions of people out onto the streets of Pakistan. Now, let me draw attention to my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/George Galloway, where there's all kinds of new material going out, including Maxwell the Monster. Now, I watched the BBC documentary, I think it was called The House of Maxwell, on television this week. A very fine series, I've got to say, despite it was on the BBC. If we know about 1% of the real Maxwell story, I'll be surprised. I'll be surprised if we know even 1% of the full Maxwell story. But you'll know more if you check out Maxwell the Monster on my Patreon page. Don't forget to donate to the show. Now, if you gave last week, maybe you've taken a holiday this week. That's fine. I accept that. But if you didn't give last week and you haven't given this week, then you're taking a very considerable risk that the show will be brought down for lack of financial resources. And I think, as this international university of the airwaves, that would be a very, very sad state of affairs indeed. So it's paypal.me/George Galloway UK. Don't forget the UK at the end of that. That's paypal.me/George Galloway UK. There it is there on the screen. No excuse for not giving. Omar is in Canada. Let's hear from him. Omar, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
Hello, George. First of all, I'm a big fan. I've been watching you for a long time.
Thank you, Omar.
I wanted to see what you think about. I want to see what you think about the growing talk about Finland joining NATO.
Yeah,
it looks
Finland
like it's
and Sweden. Yeah. It's becoming a serious
Finland and
problem.
Sweden, right? Do you think Russia is going to react by invading also?
I doubt it, but it will certainly vastly increase the total store of tension in the world. You know, if Ukraine is close to Moscow, then of course Finland is literally a stone's throw from Leningrad, from St. Petersburg, the second great city in the Russian Federation. I don't know if it's literally a stone's throw, but you could certainly catapult a stone from Finland to the border of St. Petersburg. And the idea that NATO would be there with their nuclear weapons and their nuclear bases is simply unconscionable. And why would Finland do that? They linked up with the Hitlerites in the Second World War, and they were soundly beaten and punished for doing so, since when they have stayed neutral. Why would they choose the war camp now, when they see what the consequences have been for Ukraine? Last word to you, Omar.
No, that's right. I was also wondering why Russia didn't react the same way to Estonia and Latvia joining NATO. What's the difference between them and Ukraine?
Russia was much weaker at that point in time. They didn't react to the invasion and destruction of Iraq because they were much weaker at that time. But Russia has been picked up off the floor, Omar, and is now able to stand tall in international affairs. It's a hypersonic, intercontinental, ballistic superpower. There is nobody that can fight it in war that doesn't want to risk nuclear obliteration. And its economy, as the strength of the ruble is now showing, is not invulnerable, but not nearly as vulnerable to international sanction as the people applying the sanctions thought that it would be. In short, Omar, everything that the West is now refusing to buy from Russia, they can sell to others, and moreover, can sell without having to have recourse to the dollar. They can sell in their own currency or in the currency of friendly countries. Omar, thanks. I've got to make way for Raymond in Swansea because he disagrees with me, and I always prioritize those that disagree with me. Go ahead, Raymond.
Good evening, George. I just wanted to thank you, first of all, just for a different opinion, for a different side of the story.
You've got priority. The floor is yours.
I wish you were more impartial in your views in respect to Ukraine. Do you not consider that perhaps maybe Russia is maybe bitten off more can chew in Ukraine, hence the reason why it's sort of like vacating the premises, as it were, and is moving more closer to the east?
No, I really don't. And if you thought I was impartial on anything, Raymond, then you don't know me at all. I'm not impartial about two flies climbing a wall. I'm not impartial about two pub teams down the local park. I have a world view. I have a very clearly defined worldview that I've held for more than half a century. So I'm against NATO, and I'm against NATO's adventurism. I'm amazed that you think I could be impartial about that.
But you live in this country, though, George. You used to be an MP for this country. You've been twice elected. No, before you go any further, are you saying because I live in this country, I cannot oppose my government's policies? Because if you are, you're a fascist. I'm not saying that either, George. I just think you're being a bit too pro-Russian in some of your views.
It's nothing to do with pro-Russia. Nothing at all. I'm not with Putin. I was with Zhuganov, his communist opponent. I would have voted against Putin in the presidential election. I'm against NATO. I'm against NATO in Yugoslavia, though I wasn't for Milosevic. I'm against NATO in Colombia, though I have nothing to do with the politics of Latin America. Don't you see? I'm against NATO, which is an imperialist military alliance. And I resent the fact that you bring up that I live in this country, as if all of us in this country have got an obligation to support NATO. What did you even mean by that?
I mean, you just seem to be quite far. You're very opposed and you're very pro-Russian in some of your views. That's why I wish you were a bit more impartial when it comes to like.
But I'll never be impartial. Look, if you want impartiality, then read a storybook. Everybody's partial, Raymond. The difference is 99 are partial towards NATO, and one, me, is impartial about everything in life that does not involve the domination of rich over poor, of powerful over powerless. I'm not impartial on any of these things. I have political views, which, if you're watching me, you must already have been aware of.
But what you're saying is that's the world over. It doesn't matter who runs it or what's part of the country. Like the top 1% rule everyone else. That's the way it's always been.
And I'm against that. I struggle against it. I have done all my life. Do you think I've got some obligation, Raymond, do you think I've got some obligation to support Joe Biden, an imbecile that shouldn't be allowed out alone to buy a loaf? You think I've got some obligation to support him? Where do you get that from?
No, I just think he's a relic of the Cold War as well, and he should never have been elected.
Well, he was elected, and he's now leading you over a cliff, and you want me to be impartial? You want me to be impartial about Joe Biden leading us over a cliff?
About Joe Biden, I was focusing more on Zelensky, who I think has done a fantastic job facing down the barrel of a Russian gun in the last month. But I don't think many world leaders could have achieved or have done what he's done in the last month, in all fairness to him.
It doesn't matter how much you praise him, he's not going to share his $1.3 billion with you, Raymond. But the point is, this is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. This is a NATO war. Which part of that don't you understand?
No, I agree with you. I don't think Ukraine should have joined NATO, and I completely agree with Putin's concerns that obviously that he was encroaching on the border. But I don't adhere to a NATO altogether.
Raymond, why couldn't they have said that and avoided the war? I'll tell you why. Because Joe Biden wouldn't allow them to.
I think now Zelensky's come to his senses a little bit, and he's realised that perhaps that's not going to happen.
Well, look,
but at the same time, Russia has bitten off more than it can chew when it's invaded Ukraine. It has. It was expecting an easy victory.
Will you come back and talk to me again when the war is over?
Of course I will, George. And it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I have got respect for you.
Come back to me when the war is over, and we'll see who bit off more than they can chew. It's been a pleasure disagreeing with you, Raymond. You got my blood up. Thanks for that. Thank you to all our subscribers and listeners to the MOATS podcast, and to the new listeners to my Galloway Show podcast. The Galloway Show is me and the wife and a pal in Manchester operating the sound, and it has been a phenomenal success. Doesn't cost anything to make, therefore it doesn't cost anything to watch. It's only on YouTube, exclusively on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, and it's already got double the views in episode 2 that it got in episode 1. And I predict that rate of growth will continue. And then we made a podcast out of it. So the best bits of my Wednesday 10 p.m. Galloway Show on YouTube are now out on a podcast. And between these two podcasts, we're actually turning the world of podcasts upside down. We're now available and listened to in 175 countries around the world, which is all the countries that you can have podcasts in. You know, I wanted to get to 193, but that 193 includes territories where you cannot download a podcast, like Antarctica, just to give one example. But hundreds of thousands are now downloading the podcast. So you can do it on Apple, and I think on Spotify and the usual places where you get your podcast. And lots of people are being so kind as to leave 5-star reviews. I hope that you'll do so also. Now, I've got a call from Moscow. Am I allowed to take a call from Moscow? Am I breaking the law by talking to someone in Moscow? I don't know. I don't care. Agada is in Moscow. Go ahead, Agada.
Hello. Good evening, George. Mr. George Galloway, it's an honor talking to you.
Thank you.
God bless you, your family, your wife, and your children. And I'm glad that you have this show. The truth has not been out so much, and you're one of the great people doing lots of things. You'll be remembered for thousands of years, and historians will write about you, the great things you've done. And your children and your descendants will be remembered. People will be like, those are the descendants of George Galloway. So you have a legacy that will go on for hundreds of years. And now to my point, I've been I'm from Nigeria, by the way, and I know you're way far away from ignorance, so you know Nigeria is in Africa, but for people watching that may not know, Nigeria is in Africa, and I am black. And I've been living in Moscow since 2014. I came here for education. And while I was coming, Russia offered many Nigerians, Africa, and Africans scholarships to come and study in Russia. I've been here. They have a wonderful culture. I've watched on television. My brother lives in America, and my sister lives in England. And I've seen Black Lives Matter on television. And I have to tell you something. If you want to find a place where Black Lives Matter, you come to Russia. Actually, in Russia, Black Lives Matter here. All I've had since I've got here is help. I've had a problem with a neighbor, and the police came, and they did not harass me. They listened to my story and went back to my neighbor and told my neighbor that don't bother him because he's a foreigner. Don't play jokes with him. That's exactly what they did. So respectful. And
I'm speechless. I'm speechless, Agada, at everything that you have said. I'm greatly moved by it. I recall vividly the Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow. I went there many times. I cannot bear the organized hatred of Russia, the Russian people, their culture. It's not the case that they're against Putin. It's just not. They're banning even dead Russians who died long before the Soviet Union existed, never mind the post-Soviet period in Russian history and culture. And I think that in just a few moments, you have encapsulated the greatness that lies within Russian culture and Russian society, and I'm very glad that you did. I've got to move on though, because Sarah is in Brazil, and we always prioritize women callers. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, George. First of all, I want to thank you for educating me. You have a growing popularity in Brazil. You have become one of the voices that the progressive people like to hear, so I try to bring your thoughts and to mention you in your show and all the links. But I'm calling you because you are one of the fewest people who are not afraid to talk about Julian Assange. And tomorrow, the 11th of April, is 3 days that he was brutally ripped off by Scotland Yard from the embassy, which butchered his right for political asylum. And since he was cowardly removed by the British police from that embassy, any single picture of him or his wedding, they have all been prohibited. And this act to disappear Julian Assange is so that his legacy, more relevant than ever, does not serve an example of his courage, his coherence, integrity for those that are here and will come. So I want to say, and it's also a way that the sociopathic predatorship of those people who think they own the world, they want our future, can carry on to dispose of our existence as their instruments. And I just want to say, I would like to ask everyone not to forget about Julian Assange, who's sitting in Belmarsh prison. Tomorrow there is a protest in Parliament Square at 3 o'clock. And Assange, imagine what Assange has yet to reveal about COVID, about Russia, about Ukraine. And in fact, there is a cable from William Burns, CIA director, one of the sober voices, that said, Russian, that I have the cable in front of me, but it's basically saying that Russia eventually will have to decide whether to intervene or not, a decision that Russia does not have to face. So WikiLeaks tell the stories that have been passed and the stories to come. And I'd like to thank you for your honesty and
thanks,
for your courage.
Thank you, Sarah. Very beautiful, moving call. The thanks are due to you for bringing up the demonstration tomorrow in Parliament Square in London at 3 o'clock to mark the 3rd anniversary of one of the most shameful days in modern British history, and there's a lot of competition for that title. The crucifixion of Julian Assange, for that is
what it is, continues. Julian Assange is a friend of mine, but even if he was not, I would give my last breath to free him, because Julian Assange is a world historic figure that will be remembered for centuries for the service that he has done to humanity. Thank you for that call. A reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, just click on Super Chat and you can hit the donate button there. It's a very quick way of donating. Tonight's top Super Chat contributors are Ansab Gondal, who donated the largest amount and is now our official Super Chat Supremo. Thanks, Ansab. Ivan Pedro Jimenez Correal, big thanks to you, Ivan. Peter Bram, big thanks to you, Peter. Demetrius Zaferis, thank you so much. And C. Fleming, thank you, all of you who have donated tonight. You can still donate even when we've gone off air. Please do so that we can reach the height that we did last week and pay for the entire show for the good of this open university of the airwaves. I've got to clear the decks because there's a legend on the line. It is the wonderful Norma in Bristol. How are you keeping, Norma?
Oh, George, not that special, but you keep me going. I just wanted to tell you about an argument I had today. Now, my son, we were talking about the war, and I told him that really you mustn't believe everything, that you hear. And he shouted, Mum, haven't you seen all these bombings by Russia to the Ukrainians? And, I mean, all of it's horrible anyway. But I said to him, I'm no Putin fan, but what I did was I recommended that he look at Lara Logan. Now, do you know her? She's an American...
enlighten me.
Oh, she's brilliant. She's an American war journalist, and on YouTube she has Ukraine on Fire. Now, this was recommended by a Twitter friend for me to see, and it was so good and so informative. And if you could get her on your show, I think the people would be very, very interested. Lara Logan. Look her up.
Is that L-A-R-A?
L-A-R-A, and then Logan, L-O-G-A-N. She's an American war journalist. It's brilliant, George.
Consider it done, Norma. We will do it. But I must ask before you go how your health is, because the whole of the audience cares very much about you and miss you when you don't call or we're not able to put you on air. I hope that you know that. I hope you know that you have the love of all of us here at the Open University of the Airwaves. And we pray for your continuing health, your recovery from the way that you have been feeling poorly these last few weeks, and your lovely husband also. Thank you, Norma, for that tip. I promise you, because it was your recommendation, we'll get Lara Logan on the mother of all talk shows. We're almost out of time, alas. I'll see you all again on Wednesday on YouTube, on my YouTube channel for the Galloway Show. It's just me, my wife and my pal in Manchester, but I think it's pretty high quality. See you next week also.